Thank you very much, Elizabeth. It's a great pleasure to be here at Villanova. The title of the talk is a question: is Pakistan now a democracy? That question itself, whether it is or is not, is something that I can talk about in a while, implies that perhaps it was not. And I think even if many of you don't even know where Pakistan is on the map, you probably do know that wherever it is, it's not a democracy, wasn't a democracy. So I think one of the questions that we need to look at is why, and indeed, Pakistan has not been a democracy for many years, and whether it is one or not is something that I'll talk about. So I think the first question one needs to ask is, what are the reasons that Pakistan, which was created in 1947, why it did not become a democracy for at least 6 decades or 5.5 decades, while other countries around the world, particularly India and Sri Lanka, both in South Asia, became democracies a few years after independence. One could even argue that perhaps this is a false question. Why should a country soon after independence become a democracy? If you look at Nigeria, if you look at many post-colonial countries, Nigeria, Tanzania, Kenya, they didn't really become democracies for many years after independence. It took some time. There was usually one-man rule. There's always one man who rules, never a woman. One-man rule of many of these countries. And India spoiled it for everybody by becoming a democracy. I don't think that was the right thing for countries which became independent. If one looks at the pattern around us in the 1950s and 60s, most countries didn't become democracies. India, for lots of very interesting, specific reasons, became a democracy because many of the leaders who created India were committed to the idea of socialism and some sense of equality and some sense of democracy, especially Mr. Nehru and the people around him. So, I think I actually think, and Sunil Khilnani in his book The Idea of India either says or almost says that India became a democracy by accident. And that's something which I think one needs to think about, that is India the template, or are countries like Pakistan and Nigeria and Ghana and other post-colonial countries, are they the template when in the 1950s and 60s when countries emerged? But India became a democracy, became a role model, continues to be a role model for many developing countries. Pakistan did not, and certainly has not been a role model for anybody. But I think one needs to think about why that was so. Why a country which in 1962 the New York Times wrote that there is only one country in the world which has the same future as the United States, and that country is Pakistan. And this is the New York Times writing in 1961 or 62. The London Times also wrote something very similar, saying that there have been many miracles in the world. Many countries have tried to develop, but the potential and future which Pakistan shows is has been seen only amongst very few countries. So there has been some promise somewhere, but democracy has not been something which Pakistan has started with and established for many years. It took many years for it to become democratic. So what were the reasons that Pakistan did not become democratic? And I think often one compares that with India. And the first one which you'll find all Pakistanis say is that the creator of Pakistan, the founder of Pakistan, Mr. Jinnah, who was supposed to be a liberal, secular, even a democratic person. We don't know that, but a lot of people have this myth and assumption about Mr. Jinnah, that had Mr. Jinnah lived, he died 1 year after Pakistan's creation. Had Mr. Jinnah lived, perhaps Pakistan would not be what it is today, and it would have developed into at least a liberal, secular, moderate Islamic country with democracy. That's an assumption which a lot of people make. And they compare that with India, where Nehru, for example, who died in 1964 or 62 or 64, who ruled India for 17 years, was able to establish India in the vision, in the nature that he wanted India to be, whether it was a strong state, secularism, socialism and democracy, all three. And had Nehru died like Gandhi died in 1948, perhaps the history, the democratic history of India may have been different. So there's this comparison which is usually made between Jinnah and Nehru. And one argument why Pakistan did not become a democracy in 1947 is stated that Jinnah died, and therefore Pakistan did not have the leadership which India had. And I think there's some truth in that. A newly emerging country, but if you look at the countries that are named earlier, Ghana, Tanzania, Kenya, they had strong leadership, they had strong independence movements, but they also did not have democracy. And a lot of people have questioned Jinnah's so-called democratic values because he did dismiss some elected governments in Pakistan after 1947. So I mean, there's some myth, some doubt, but nevertheless it's one of the arguments that is presented. The second argument which is presented about why Pakistan did not become a democracy is those who made Pakistan were migrants who came from India to Pakistan. So the so-called Muslim League, which was largely from the United Provinces in India, Mr. Jinnah came from Bombay and Gujarat and Bombay. Many of the leaders in Pakistan who created Pakistan came from India. So one of the arguments which is also presented by scholars is that these people who made Pakistan did not have a constituency in Pakistan. They had their roots in India. In fact, as many of you may know, that Mr. Jinnah retained his house in Bombay, and at the time of partition said that I'll go home to Bombay for the summer vacations or the winter vacations. So there was that sense of the home was somewhere else. These people created a different country, but a sense of where they were, their roots were somewhere else. So I think that's another reason why many migrants who created Pakistan, who played a very important role. I mean, if you remember, the freedom movement for Pakistan took place in India, not in Pakistan, not in the area in East Pakistan or West Pakistan, but in New Delhi, in the United Provinces, in Lucknow, in Hyderabad, Deccan, in Bombay, in those areas. So ironically, that part of India which did not become Pakistan is where the so-called Pakistan struggle took place. Later on, the Unionist Party, others in the Punjab joined the Pakistan movement, but the original movement started in Aligarh, Delhi, and in the United Provinces. So that's the second reason. The third is that not many people who live in Pakistan or who work on Pakistan still remember that in 1947 there were two Pakistans, East and West. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of independence, I was teaching at Karachi University. So I asked my students, I said, tell me the three most important things that have happened since 1947 in the last 50 years. Not a single student mentioned East Pakistan. So East Pakistan, which was part of what Pakistan was, actually had the predominant population between East and West. East Pakistan had about 53% or 52% of the population. West Pakistan had 48%. And West Pakistan, because these migrants moved to West Pakistan, they dominated what was Pakistan, and had elections been held as they were in 1970, East Pakistan would have won, and the locus of power would have shifted to East Pakistan. So that's a third reason why those who controlled what was West Pakistan did not want elections to take place in East Pakistan, because they would have lost as they did in 1970. A fourth reason is also one that Pakistan, unlike India, did not have the leadership and did not have something which India had, which were land reforms, for example. Pakistan was controlled by large landowners who are called feudals or feudal large landowners, who were also politicians. So they had no reason for politics, no reason for elections, rather, for democracy. They were all part of the political culture, political elite in Pakistan. They already had power, so they were not really interested. There was no middle class. And that's why a lot of people, Sudipto Kaviraj, for example, a scholar on India, has argued that India's democracy is also largely owed to Jawaharlal Nehru. And it's almost an accident, because India did not have the social groups, did not have the middle class in 1947. Today we can't imagine India without being a democracy. And today we can't imagine Pakistan without being a military dictatorship, but maybe things have changed. That's the second part of the talk which I'll come to, whether it is a democracy or not. So that's the fourth reason why Pakistan did not become a democracy, because those in power had no reason for democracy. They already had power. They were large landowners. The fifth reason, and this is the 1947, early 1950s, was the most organized, most powerful, most efficient force at that time was the Pakistan military. And as we know, militaries don't necessarily like elections, because that means you push them aside and other people take decisions most of the time. So the military also said that we'll govern the country, we'll administer the country, we'll resolve the problems of a newly formed country, and there were many problems which Pakistan had. So at that time there were these 4 or 5 reasons which came together from 1947 to about the mid 1950s, and after that, where it was well established that Pakistan did not necessarily need democracy. So there was the earlier years of Pakistan set the tone for a military government throughout for many years, without any constituency for democracy or for elections. So you start with that pattern. So that's the earlier years. Why Pakistan, unlike India, unlike Sri Lanka, because it did not have the leadership, because it did not have the same sort of commitment to democracy, and because I think perhaps because Mr. Jinnah died, it's one of those counterfactuals. If Mr. Jinnah had lived for 10 years, would Pakistan be what it is today? One wonders. Could it have become a democracy? There are a lot of people who put faith in Mr. Jinnah and believe that that may have happened, but let's leave it at just faith rather than that. So that's the first reason. The second is that certainly for about 40 or 50 years, Pakistan has not been a democracy. And whenever there have been 3 very long military governments in Pakistan. Whenever a military government takes over, the general stays in power for about 10 or 11 years. General Ayub stayed in power for 11 years. After that, he handed over power to another general. So there were 12 or 13 years of military government, 1957 to 1971. Then there was military government from 1977 to 1988, General Ziaul Haq, and then Pakistan was lucky to have its third general, General Musharraf, from 1999 to 2008. One of the very interesting patterns in Pakistan is that the United States has been one of the most powerful and friendly allies of Pakistan whenever a military general has been in power. It's a coincidence, it's realpolitik, it's the Cold War when Ayub Khan was in power. Ayub Khan was supported by the Americans throughout, because his government allowed the U-2 plane, spy planes to be flown from Pakistan. He was anti-communist, anti-India, and the United States was looking for allies in the region. India from 1947 onwards, at least from the early 1950s, clearly supported the Soviet Union. Its socialism, its model for the future was a Soviet Union type model. They became friends with the Soviet Union. For some reason, Mr. Nehru and Indira Gandhi believed that the Soviet Union represented a better ally for them than the United States. The United States also took sides at that time and decided to support Pakistan. One reason why it supported Pakistan was, and if you look at what are now declassified documents, it seems that the United States felt that Pakistan was a liberal country under Ayub Khan. It was a modern country, a modernizing country, and unlike many of the Arab states, and unlike Gamal Abdul Nasser, who was nationalist, Ayub Khan was more compliant, a faithful ally, and so on and so forth. So the United States supported Pakistan and a military general throughout the 1960s during the Cold War period. In fact, about 1964, 1965, about 5% of GDP of Pakistan's GDP came from the United States, foreign aid, military aid, and other aid. So there was a substantial support. Ziaul Haq, the second general, takes over in 1977. 1979, the Soviets invade Afghanistan. After that, again Ziaul Haq becomes this whole champion against communism, and Ronald Reagan in power in Washington Margaret Thatcher in power in London, and Ziaul Haq is a perfect ally against Soviet expansionism. So the West supports the military dictator in Pakistan from 1977 to 1988, who I think did more damage to Pakistan than India, Osama bin Laden, George Bush, everybody put together. I think the cultural, the social fabric that we see in Pakistan, this Islamic militancy, Islamic terrorism, whatever you want to call it, has its roots in this the Ziaul Haq years. So that's, but with the help of the Americans. I remember Ronald Reagan calling the Mujahideen at that time, who are now the Taliban of today, as the freedom fighters. I think he thought he said that they are like the freedom fighters, the Pilgrims fathers, the forefathers, the founding fathers of the American, the new America in the 1770s and so on and so forth. So the Mujahideen at that time, who were supported by the CIA, by Reagan, by Thatcher, by Kohl, by Ziaul Haq, who are today's Taliban, who grew up to be today's Taliban, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar and Charlie Wilson and his war. This is the same continuity which has caused today's Taliban. So I think Ziaul Haq, who was supported by the United States, and there was never a question of democracy in Pakistan, because Pakistan became a frontline state against Soviet expansionism. So that continued. Suddenly we have a third military dictator, and we have another Republican president in Washington, George Bush, and then you have 9/11, and the same deal is recast. General Musharraf becomes, when Bill Clinton was president, General Musharraf, I don't know if you remember, Bill Clinton came to India for 5 days, and he stopped in Pakistan for 5 hours in the same trip. And I think he's one of the few American presidents who spoke to the Pakistani people, and he admonished Musharraf for the coup that he undertook in 99. But when George Bush becomes president and 9/11 takes place, suddenly Musharraf becomes his best buddy, and the best buddy of Tony Blair and a lot of other people. So this is the third time that we have the United States supporting a military dictator in Pakistan, because it suits whatever the objectives of the United States are with regard to Afghanistan, whether it's the Osama bin Laden Al-Qaeda threat, whether it's the Soviet expansionism. And in 2007, there was a very active lawyers movement taking place in Pakistan, one of the few widespread public protests against the military regime. But even at that time, the United States government continued to support Musharraf, because George Bush, actually, maybe not Cheney, George Bush, Rumsfeld, and not so much the United States government, continued to support General Musharraf, because he was fighting the war against terror, and he became a very important ally. So I think it's important to remember that one reason why democracy has not existed in Pakistan is not because the Americans have brought about military dictatorship in Pakistan. It's not as if Pakistan has been a banana republic like many Latin American countries, where a coup has taken place on the behest of the Americans. But whenever a military government has been in Pakistan, and actually it's been the case for a large number of years, the Americans have tended to support the military government. If you look at the statistics, military governments have received more aid from the United States than have civilian governments. And one reason for that is because military governments have been in power for longer in Pakistan. But I think there is a close relationship with US foreign policy, what happened to happen in Afghanistan, and the fact that Pakistan was ruled by a military government and received support from the United States. So that's the second reason why. The first reason is the historical reason. The second is that the military happens to be in power, and the US strengthens the hand of the military rather than democratic forces. The third is that actually the military has been very popular in Pakistan in public perception. It sounds strange. Why would somebody support the military? But it has been popular. And if you ask any Pakistani, which is the most well-known song in Pakistan, most would think of a song of the 1965 war, which sort of idealizes the Pakistani soldier fighting against the war in India, sung by a very famous Pakistani singer called Madam Noor Jahan. So the public perception of the soldier in Pakistan has not been until recently one which has been, a brutal, autocratic, authoritarian type of figure. Military government in Pakistan has not been like Pinochet's military government. It has not been like the Latin American model, where a large number of local people have been assassinated whenever a coup takes place. So, the 3 coups that have taken place in Pakistan, the next morning the headline is always a bloodless coup takes place, as if it's a good thing. But nevertheless, a bloodless coup takes place. So, whenever there's been a coup in Pakistan, a military coup, people have not been killed, because A, they haven't protested, B, they said, okay, so what, the last people were as bad, these can't be any worse. So, there's been almost an apathetic sort of treatment of military governments until recently, and I think the until recently part is the more important part. But in the past, military governments have been able to dismiss elected governments, dismiss governments which are not very efficient, and take over without much public protest. Also, what is very interesting is that whenever military governments have been in power in Pakistan, which has been a long time, the economy has done very well. And if you compare, which I tell my students not to do this, but if you compare military governments and their economic record and civilian governments and their economic record, the performance of military governments is far better than it is of civilian governments. One reason is aid from the United States. The other reason is that there is stability. When you have democratic governments, elected governments, there's a lot of toing and froing, bargaining, government shutdown. That happens in many countries. So government shuts down for 15 days, for 35 days. In Pakistan, governments break down. We are not as educated as you are, and we're not as sophisticated as you are. So, our way of dealing with elected governments is very different. So, that happens. But when the military is in power, that never happens. When a general takes over, business knows that they're in business for the next 10 years. They know there's going to be stability. They know the economic policies are not going to change. So, it's very good for business. So, it's good for business, the economy grows. And military governments are smart enough to work with businesses, and that's how they thrive, and that's how businesses thrive. So, the economy does well, people are happy, they don't care, they get water, they get a new TV, they get a new phone, they're making money, employment increases, and so on and so forth. So, people say, what difference does it make? What will democracy give us? So the economy does well. Military governments are not perceived to be brutal, authoritarian, killers, fascists, as they have been in many other countries. So, it's a difference. The Pakistani military has been very different from other. It's been authoritarian, anti-democratic, but it hasn't been the Chile kind or the Brazil kind of democracy. So, that's another reason. A fourth or fifth or sixth, fifth reason is that opposition parties, this is another one of those very political actors have supported military coups in Pakistan. If you are out of government, this happened in 1977 and it happened in 1999, the political parties which were out of government welcomed the military to take over. In 1977, many of the political parties which were against Mr. Bhutto, who was prime minister at that time, said, fine, we support the military, because the military is going to undertake elections in 90 days, which happened to be many years, 9 years, but 90 days. So, they supported the military. At least you got rid of your opponents. In 99 also, when General Musharraf took over, some political parties were very happy with that, and they said, okay, Nawaz Sharif, who was trying to bring about Sharia, Islamic law, was inefficient and corrupt. Political parties felt that's very good. The opposition supported them. The judiciary, which we are going to talk about in a few minutes, the famous judiciary in Pakistan, that has sanctified every military takeover in Pakistan from 1958 onwards. It's called the doctrine of necessity. The judiciary said it's necessary that the military takes over, because that's in the interest of Pakistan. So, the judiciary has always sanctified military rule in Pakistan. So, you've got opposition political parties, you've got the judiciary, you've got the military, which is very popular. So, who needs democracy? You've got a system in place where non-democratic forces are welcome, they are given constitutional protection, and they stay in power. So, opposition political parties and this. When Musharraf took over in 99, the discourse was slightly different. People said, a lot of liberals, well-meaning people who one calls lifestyle liberals, who like to have a good time, but don't necessarily believe in democracies. It's not the political liberals when one talks about. When one talks about political liberals, you have to at least believe in some form of representation which is where you can participate, which is called democracy. Pakistani liberals felt that the society was shifting too much towards Islamization. It was becoming highly intolerant. When Musharraf took over, he came across as an enlightened, liberal, good time, having fun sort of general, and a lot of liberals who had earlier fought against Ziaul Haq said that doesn't matter, he's a good man, and he's going to good governance is what Pakistan needs. It doesn't need representation. The first photograph, the first public photograph of Pakistan of General Musharraf was published in, I think, the Sunday Times, was when he had 2 dogs under his arms, 2 I think small dogs, I think they're called Pekingese, 2 dogs under his arms, and his wife was wearing a sleeveless sari or a sleeveless blouse, or maybe a shalwar kameez, but I think a sari. Both symbols are very, in some ways, not anti-Islamic, but a lot of Puritan Muslims who consider dogs not to be very clean. They're not supposed to, there's some sense of an Islamic sense of what is clean and what is not clean. What is what's the right word? Not clean. What word would you use for palit? What's the word for? Do you know that? What's the English word? Is anybody who speaks Urdu? Yeah, impure. I think that's the word. So clean, impure. Dogs are not, by some Muslims are not considered considered very impure. So here you have a military man with 2 dogs, so it's an anti-Islamic sort of thing. And you have his wife who's wearing a sleeveless blouse, which is no big deal, but a picture like that. So here, when General Musharraf takes over, the imagery is such that he's a liberal man, let's support him. Many people who fought against military dictators in the past, because they happen to be like Ziaul Haq Islamists, said we'll support Musharraf. So even the liberal elite supported General Musharraf. So there has been an acceptance of dictatorship in Pakistan. There's been an acceptance of military dictatorship in Pakistan, and until recently the record of democracy in Pakistan has been rather poor. In the 11 years from 1988 to 1999, there were 4 elected governments in Pakistan, but nobody would really call them democratic. Benazir Bhutto was in power twice, Nawaz Sharif was in power twice, and they mismanaged the economy. They were very corrupt, they were very inefficient, and it's not a good poster for democracy in Pakistan. So a lot of people used to say that, what does democracy do? What's the point of democracy? So this idea that democracy is something very natural, everybody wants it, and whenever the military was in power, as I said, the economy grew, people had jobs, they had more money in their pockets, they were able to spend, and there was a sense of prosperity, false or otherwise, but there was a sense of prosperity. So until about 2007 or so, the general general public discourse was not really pro-democracy. It was, whatever goes, the military government is good, and so on and so forth. However, in 2007 everything changed completely, and for the first time perhaps Pakistan started its journey towards democracy. Whether it is a democracy or not is something I'll end with, but it started its journey towards democracy, and genuine democracy, perhaps for the first time. So until 2007, if you ask the question in Pakistan, which is the most powerful institution, I don't think there would have been anybody who would have not said the army. It was obvious. For 50 years or 60 years, the military has dominated politics, the public sphere, foreign policy, nuclear policy, everything that has to do with Pakistan. After 2007, the discourse changes a little bit, and it becomes a little unclear as to which is the most dominant group in Pakistan, institution in Pakistan. So because the military has been dominant, so obviously democracy, democratic forces have not had a chance to rise, because military dictatorships have been strong throughout. In 2007, a number of events take place. The Chief Justice is dismissed, a mosque in Islamabad is bombed by General Musharraf, killing maybe 100 or maybe 1,000 a madrasa, as a seminary is bombed, a mosque is bombed in Islamabad, in the heart of Islamabad, shown live on television. So suddenly there's a twist, turn away from General Musharraf. The same people who welcomed him in 99 sort of started distancing from themselves from Musharraf. A lawyers' movement starts in Pakistan, where General Musharraf dismissed the Chief Justice of Pakistan, and a movement for his restoration starts, and many lawyers are involved in that. A very large public movement begins in Pakistan. The media also emerges as a free voice. I mean, this is another thing about military dictatorship in Pakistan. Under General Musharraf, he was a military dictator, authoritarian, unelected, but you had a very free, vibrant press and television, electronic media, very vibrant media in Pakistan, very free media in Pakistan, in which criticism of Musharraf also used to take place, in which the lawyers' movement, for example, was shown live. You could talk about many things. So there was a vibrant media which sort of began to emerge as an alternate voice, alternate to the military, alternate to dictatorship. So you had these two. You had the lawyers' movement taking place. You had the media rising, and also the judiciary started hearing cases against the military. In 2007, 2008, you had a backlash against the military, and the judiciary, which had always supported military rule, suddenly became independent. Started a case against disappeared people in Pakistan. The military has picked up many people on suspicion of and held them, and they have disappeared. I think something like Argentina, where the disappeared mothers played a very important role in the 1980s, I think 1980s. So there's been a wide movement in Pakistan protesting the disappeared people, many in Balochistan, some Islamists, and so on and so forth. And the judiciary has held the military accountable for those people. It's not often, in fact, it's almost seldom in Pakistan that the chief of the army, the former president of Pakistan, has ended up in jail. General Musharraf, until recently, was in jail. One doesn't see that happening. I mean, he's the president of Pakistan, supposed to have immunity. He's a military general, supposed to not be arrested, but he was arrested. And the media started playing a very active role. The judiciary started playing a very active role, and there was a resurgence of civil society asking for democratic rights, asking for saying enough of the military. I think the military has lived long enough, has been around long enough, and there was a change in the public mood, which one has not seen in the past. And this something changed. This is before the Arab Spring. It has nothing to do with what was happening in other Muslim countries. It's something that was very indigenous, something that was very local. It had nothing to do with social media. It had nothing to do with Twitter or Facebook, as some people claim the Arab Spring had to do, was part of that movement. So it was a very indigenous movement which gave rise to elections to take place in Pakistan in 2000, and they were supposed to be held in 2007, and then Benazir Bhutto was assassinated in December 2007, and after that elections were held, 2008 and then 2013. So I think one sees a change in mood in Pakistan, a change in discourse against the military, and also one sees the military retreating. It has always claimed that it is the arbiter and the guide of the Pakistani nation, the defender of the nation. It's moral in moral terms, in ethical terms, in geographical and territorial terms. But after 9/11, I think the geography of where the military was involved started changing. It had always been involved against India, but now it had to get involved against on the border of Afghanistan, fighting Islamists in Pakistan. And so after 9/11, I think the military felt that it was not able to govern, to rule as it had in the past. And at the same time, there was a change in the mood of the Pakistani public. So this discourse of democracy started emerging. So what has happened since 2007, 2008? What has happened since? And what makes what makes a democracy, and what makes Pakistan a democracy now? So I'm going to argue and conclude that Pakistan is a democracy, a very bad one, but certainly a democracy, one which is learning, one which is evolving. And why that is the case? Why do I make that argument? And why what is changed and what is changing? First of all, it's had free and fair elections. Now, I know that's not a big deal for American voters here, and even for people in India or other countries. But whenever elections have been held in Pakistan in the 1990s, they were always rigged. They were rigged by the military. They were they were manipulated. In 2008 and 2013, they have largely been free and fair and transparent elections. I think a very important development in Pakistan. Secondly, this is the first time from 2008 to 2013 that power has been handed over from one elected government of Mr. Zardari to another elected government of Mr. Nawaz Sharif. That has never happened before in Pakistan. The military has always been the handmaiden and said that you are going to make so and so prime minister. When Benazir was elected in 1988, she had the largest number of seats, but for 21 days she was not asked to become prime minister by the military, because they were trying to manipulate and try to rule what's going to happen. In 2013, by the evening before elections results were announced publicly, formally, Nawaz Sharif said, I am the next prime minister, let's start forming my cabinet. So there's a complete change in how that happened. The military was not involved in Nawaz Sharif's election, which took place a few months ago. The president was not involved, the Americans were not involved. So one can see that a genuine electoral democratic change taking place in Pakistan for the first time in 67 years. So that's a very good sign. The majority party, Nawaz Sharif's party, whether one likes it or not, the majority party was asked to form government by the president. They formed a government, and the president at that time was from a different party. He was Mr. Zardari, who belonged to the opposition party. And another very interesting thing happened. I think for the first time in Pakistan's history, the losing party congratulated the winning party. I mean, that has also not happened. Politicians have always contested, accused, manipulated, stabbed daggers in the back of opposition parties, but for the first time in 2013 in May, the opposition party willingly conceded defeat and said, we accept, we know who's won. So that's a change in mood, a change in practice, a change in how parties performed. The opposition, Islamist parties all said, we accept these results, and so on and so forth. There is a wide support for democracy as well in civil society, even amongst Islamists, even amongst Islamic political parties in Pakistan. There has been a general acceptance of democracy, and even Islamic parties, except a few very fringe ones, have always contested elections and always lost elections, but they have always been willing to play the democratic game. Of course, they play games outside as well, but they have taken part in elections. So I think the general discourse has again been wider and reinforced by these parties forming so contesting elections and strengthening democracy. So I'll end with one or two points, and I think the important point is this, that the military government in Pakistan, the military governments in Pakistan, for numerous reasons, I think one or two reasons are important. One was that Osama bin Laden was found in a place called Abbottabad, which is about an hour's drive from Rawalpindi, which is the head of the military, from Islamabad, which is the capital of Pakistan. And the military was made to look very foolish and made to look very stupid by this attack that took place, and rightfully so. The public discourse at that time was that how could the Pakistan military allow a foreign power, whether it's the Americans or Indians, to come and invade Pakistan? And there was a large discourse about issues of sovereignty, and if the military can't say protect Pakistan, what good are they anyway? So there was a very strong anti-military backlash. Soon after that, soon after this event, after Osama bin Laden, there was an attack on a military base in Pakistan, in Karachi. And again people said, what kind of military is this? They can't even protect themselves. How are they going to protect the civilians in Pakistan? So there's been a general move against the military in Pakistan, a public discourse which says that the military is perhaps not the best solution. The military has also withdrawn. So, it's been a parallel process, a questioning of what the military is good for, that they can't do very much for the civilians of Pakistan, a rise in democratic sentiment, a rise in democratic sort of behavior, an acceptance of opposition parties, an acceptance of different points of view. Both political parties, the main 2 or 3 main political parties, all agree to what the rules of democracy are. So, that's been the pattern. So, I'll end by saying that the question, is Pakistan now a democracy? The answer is yes, but unlike India, perhaps unlike, maybe I am not sure about Sri Lanka, but certainly unlike India, one can't be certain that the military will not intervene again. One can't be certain that the next time I am here in 5 years, I will be saying, okay, we are back to military dictatorship in Pakistan. That's always a possibility. But I think for the first time, perhaps for the first time, I think the tide is changing, and it also, I think here the Arab Spring might help. Where in many countries, I don't know about Egypt now, whether it's, I don't think it's a democracy, and sadly so. I think even if the Brotherhood was and what was the guy's name? Mursi. Even if Mursi, we didn't like him, you didn't like him, doesn't matter, he was elected by the Egyptian people. One has to respect that form of electoral democracy. And what's interesting is Nawaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, condemned the military takeover in Egypt because he said this is anti-democratic, and I don't think he necessarily supports Mursi or the Brotherhood, because his politics is very different, his Islamic view is very different, but Pakistan has now become a champion of democracy even in the region. So, I think there's a global effect, there's a regional effect, there's a local effect, but one can't be sure that Pakistan is now certainly and forever going to be a democracy. I can say that about India, but I can't say that about Pakistan. So, I'll end there. Thank you very much.